Alright, hi everyone. Welcome to the live for the reading session today. So today we'll be reading Around the World in 80 Days. So hi Blackpink in your area. Hi Oversea and Play Veteran. Thank you for joining our live today. Okay. So sorry there's some technical difficulties right now. We'll be proceeding in a short while. Okay, thank you for liking the live. Okay, so we'll be starting from the first chapter. Okay. So over here, Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. So for the first chapter, in which Phileas Fogg and Passepartout accept each other, the one as master, the other as man. So if there's any words that you find that is challenging or you want to clarify about, feel free to ask me in the comments down below, okay? Okay, so let's move on. Mr. Phileas Fogg lived in 1872 at number 7 Savile Row, Burlington Gardens, the house in which Sheridan died in 1814. He was one of the most noticeable members of the Reform Club, though he seemed always to avoid attracting attention, an enigmatical personage about whom little was known. So we have enigmatical personage. What does this mean? So enigmatical personage. Okay. Enigmatical will mean over here. Let me write the definition. Okay. Enigmatical. Enigmatical means more on mysterious ways or being unable to comprehend. Enigmatic. Mysterious. I believe all of you are having your September holiday, enjoying your September holidays right now. So thank you for tuning in to join our live as of now. Okay, moving on, about whom little was known, except that he was a polished man of the world. People said that he resembled Byron, at least that his head was Byronic, but he was a bearded, tranquil Byron, who might live on 1,000 years without growing old. Okay? Certainly for an Englishman, it was more doubtful whether Phileas Fogg was a Londoner. He was never seen on 'Change, nor at the bank, nor in the counting rooms of the city. No ships ever came into London docks, of which he was the owner. He had no public employment. He had never been entered at any of the Inns of Court, either at the Temple, or Lincoln's Inn, or Gray's Inn, nor had his voice ever resounded in the Court of Chancery, or in the Exchequer, or the Queen's Bench, or the ecclesiastical courts. He was certainly not a manufacturer, nor was he a merchant or a gentleman farmer. His name was strange to the scientific learned societies, and he was never known to take part in the sage deliberations of the Royal Institution of the London Institution, the Artisans' Association, or the Institution of Arts and Sciences. He belonged, in fact, to none of the numerous societies which swarmed in the English capital. From the harmonic to that of the entomologists, found, founded mainly for the purpose of abolishing pernicious insects. So, some of the vocabulary words that you have seen in the book reading through our reading session today can be used for your composition writing. And for the P6s, do take them down as your English paper 1 is coming soon. Okay, pernicious insects. So what does pernicious mean? Pernicious, very harmful. Okay. Very harmful. Hi, flying duck emoji. Thank you for joining our live today. That's a very interesting username, by the way. Okay, moving on. Over here, Phileas Fogg was a member of the Reform, and that was all. The way in which he got the admission to this exclusive club was simple enough. He was recommended by the Barings, with whom he had an open credit. So remember, for this, whom he. So it will always be a noun after whom. Just take note of this. It will be a noun or a pronoun. Okay? His checks were regularly paid at sight from his account current, which was always flush. Was Phileas Fogg rich? Undoubtedly, but those who knew him best could not imagine how he had made his fortune. And Mr. Fogg was the last person to whom apply for the information. He was not lavish, nor, on the contrary, avaricious. For whenever he knew that money was needed for a noble, useful, or benevolent purpose, he supplied it quietly and sometimes anonymously. He was, in short, at least, communicative of men. He talked very little, and seemed all the more mysterious for his taciturn manner. His daily habits were quite open to observations, but whatever he did was so exactly the same thing that he had always done before, that the wits of the curious were fairly puzzled. Had he travelled? It was likely, but for no one seemed to know the world more familiarly. There was no spot so secluded that he did not appear to have an intimate acquaintance with it. He often corrected, with a few clear words, the thousand conjectures advanced by members of the club as to lost and unheard of travellers, pointing out to the true probabilities and seeming as if gifted with a sort of second sight. So often did events justify his predictions. He must have travelled everywhere, at least in the spirit. It was at least certain that Phileas Fogg had not absented himself from London for many years. Those who were honoured by a better acquaintance with him than the rest declared that nobody could pretend to ever have seen him anywhere else. His sole pastimes were reading the papers. Pastimes, hobby. Okay, over here, let me write down. Hobby. Okay. For reading the papers and playing whist. He often won at this game, which, as a silent one, harmonized with his nature, but his winnings never went into his purse, being reserved as a fund for his charities. Mr. Fogg played not to win, but for the sake of playing. The games was in his eyes a contest, a struggle with a difficulty, yet a motionless, unwearying struggle, congenial to his taste. Phileas Fogg was not known to have either wife or children, which may happen to most honest people, either relatives or near friends, which is certainly more unusual. So, he lived alone in his house in Savile Row, whither none penetrated. A single domestic sufficed to serve him. He breakfasted and dined at the club, at hours mathematically fixed, in the same room, at the same table, never taking his meals with other members, much less bringing a guest with him, and went home at exactly midnight, only to retire at once to bed. Okay, so this is a good phrase that we could probably use to retire at once to bed. This means to just finally wind down and go to sleep. Okay, moving on. Over here, we continue. He never used the cozy chambers which the reform provides for its favored members. He passed 10 hours out of the 24 in Savile Row, either in sleeping or making his toilet. When he chose to take a walk, it was with a regular step in the entrance hall with its mosaic flooring, or in a circular gallery with its dome supported by 20 red porphyry Ionic columns and illumined by blue painted windows. So what is illumine? This comes from the word illuminate. It means to light up. Okay? This means to light up. When he breakfasted or dined, all the resources of the club, its kitchens and pantries, its buttery and dairy, aided to crowd his table with their most succulent stories. He was served by the gravest waiters, in dress coats and shoes with swan-skin soles, who proffered in the viands in special porcelain, and on the finest linen club decanters of a lost mould contained his sherry, his port, and his cinnamon-spiced claret, while his beverages were refreshingly cooled with ice, brought at a great cost from the American lakes. So this ice was bought at a great cost, expensive, from the American lakes. So it means that the ice were bought from the American lakes. Okay, let's move on right now. If to live in this style is to be eccentric, it must be confessed that there is something good in the eccentricity. Okay, moving on. If there's any questions or any words you want to clarify, feel free to be in the comments. And for those who are currently watching our live right now, thank you for tuning in. Do remember to follow us and give us likes so that you can keep up with our daily live lessons and learn more English with us. Okay. If to live in this style is to be eccentric, it must be confessed that there is something good in eccentricity. So what does eccentricity mean? There's eccentric and eccentricity. So what does eccentricity mean? Does anyone know? Okay, it is again something strange or unusual. Okay. The mansion in Savile Row, though not sumptuous, was exceedingly comfortable. The habits of its occupant were such as to demand but little from the sole domestic, but Phileas Fogg required him to be almost superhumanly prompt and regular. On this very 2nd of October, he had dismissed James Foster, because that luckless youth had brought him shaving water at 84 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 86, and he was awaiting his successor, who was due at the house between 11 and half past. Okay, moving on, Phileas Fogg was seated squarely in his armchair, his feet close together like those of a grenadier on his parade, his hands resting on his knees, his body straight, his head erect, and he was steadily watching a complicated clock, which indicated the hours, the minutes, the seconds, the days, the months, and the years. So this is a very long description on him looking at a complicated clock. Okay, and over here, seated squarely, which means that he was seated properly and in chair. Okay, moving on. If there's any words you want to clarify, feel free to let me know, okay? Okay, over here next. At exactly 11:30, Mr. Fogg would, according to his daily habit, quit Savile Row and repair to the Reform. Okay. A rap at this moment sounded on the door of the cosy apartment where Phileas Fogg was seated, and James Foster, the dismissed servant, appeared. "The new servant," said he. A young man of 30 advanced and bowed. So means he walked forward. He walked forward and bowed. Okay? "You are a Frenchman, I believe," asked Phileas Fogg, "and your name is John?" "Jean, if Monsieur pleases," replied the newcomer. "Jean Passepartout, a surname which has clung to me because I have a natural aptness for going out of one business into another. I believe I'm honest, monsieur, but to be outspoken, I've had several traits." So over here we have seen a new word that maybe some of us are unclear of, aptness. So what does aptness mean? It means a quality of being suitable or right for a particular situation. Okay, natural suitability. But to be outspoken, I've had several traits. I've been an itinerant singer, a circus rider, when I used to vault like Leotard and dance on a rope like Blondin. Then I got to be a professor of gymnastics so as to make better use of my talents. And then I was a sergeant fireman at Paris and assisted at many big fires. But I quitted France 5 years ago and wishing to taste the sweets of domestic life. Took service as a valet here in England. Finding myself out of place and hearing that Monsieur Phileas Fogg was the most exact and settled gentleman in the United Kingdom, I have come to Monsieur in the hope of living with him a tranquil life and forgetting even the name of Passepartout. "Passepartout suits me," responded Mr. Fogg. "You are well recommended to me. I hear a good report of you. You know my conditions?" "Yes, monsieur." "Good. What time is it?" 22 minutes after 11, returned Passepartout, drawing an enormous silver watch from the depths of his pocket. "You are too slow," said Mr. Fogg. "Pardon me, monsieur, it is impossible." "You are 4 minutes too slow. No matter, it's enough to mention the error. Now from this moment, 29 minutes after 11 a.m., this Wednesday, 2nd October, you are in my service." Phileas Fogg got up, took his hat in his left hand, put it on his head with an automatic motion, and went off without a word. Passepartout heard the street door shut once. It was his new master going out. He heard it shut again. It was his predecessor, James Forrester, departing in his turn. Passepartout remained alone in the house in Savile Row. So we have now reached the second chapter of the book. Thank you all those for listening in our live this morning. Do remember to follow us and like our live so that you can keep up with our daily reading sessions every day. Okay? Okay. So moving on. Faith, muttered Passepartout, somewhat flurried. I've seen people at Madame Tussaud's as lively as my new master. Madame Tussaud's people, let it be said, are of wax, and are much visited in London. Speech is all that is wanting to make them human. During his brief interview with Mr. Fogg, Passepartout had been carefully observing him. He appeared to be a man about 40 years of age, with fine, handsome features, and a tall, well-shaped figure. His hair and whiskers were light, his forehead compact and unwrinkled, his face rather pale, his teeth magnificent, his countenance possessed in the highest degree what physiognomists call response in action, a quality of those who act rather than talk. Calm and phlegmatic, with a clear eye, Mr. Fogg seemed a perfect type of that English composure which Angelica Kauffmann has so skillfully represented on canvas. Seen in the various phases of his daily life, he gave the idea of being perfectly well balanced, as exactly regulated as a Leroy chronometer. Phileas Fogg was indeed exactitude personified, and this was betrayed even in the expression of his very hands and feet. For in men, as well as in animals, the limbs themselves are expressive of the passions. He was so exact that he was never in a hurry, was always ready, and was economical alike of his steps and his motions. He never took one step too many, and always went to his destination by the shortest cut. He had no superfluous gestures, and was never seen to be moved or agitated. So for agitated, it means worked up. Okay? He was most deliberate person in the world, yet always reached his destination at the exact moment. Because he always has a very accurate clock and good management of time. He lived alone and, so to speak, outside of every social relation, and as he knew what in this world counts must be taken of friction, and that friction retards, he never rubbed against anybody. As for Passepartout, he was a true Parisian of Paris. Sorry. Since he had abandoned his own country for England, taking service as a valet, he had in vain searched for a master after his own heart. Passepartout was by no means one of those pedunces depicted by Moliere with a bold gaze and a nose held high in the air. He was an honest fellow, with a pleasant face, a good round head, such as one likes to see on the shoulders of a friend. His eyes were blue, his complexion rubicund. And his figure almost portly and well built. His body muscular and his physical powers fully developed by the exercises of his younger days. His brown hair was somewhat tumbled, for while the ancient sculptors are said to have known 18 methods of arranging Minerva's tresses, Passepartout was familiar with but one of his dressing his own three strokes with a large three strokes of a large tooth comb completed his toilet. It would be rash to predict how Passepartout's lively nature would agree with Mr. Fogg. It was impossible to tell whether the new servant would turn out as absolutely methodical as his master required. Experience alone could solve the question. Passepartout had been a sort of vagrant in his early years, and now yearned for a response, but so far he had failed to find it. Though he had already served in 10 English houses, but he could not take root in any of these. With chagrin, he found his masters invariably whimsical and irregular, constantly running about the country or on the lookout for adventure. His last master, young Lord Longferry, Member of Parliament, after passing his nights in the Haymarket taverns, was too often brought home in the morning on policemen's shoulders. Passepartout, desirous of respecting the gentleman whom he served, ventured a mild remonstrance on such conduct, which, being ill received, he took his leave. Hearing that Mr. Phileas Fogg was looking for a servant, and that his life was one of unbroken regularity, that he neither travelled nor stayed from home overnight, he felt sure that this would be the place he was after. He presented himself and was accepted, as has been seen. Okay. After 11:30 then, Passepartout found himself alone in the house in Savile Row. He began its inspection without delay, scouring it from cellar to garret. So clean, well arranged, solemn a mansion pleased him. It seemed to him like a snail's shell, lighted and warmed by gas, which sufficed for both these purposes. When Passepartout reached for the second story, he recognized at once the room which he was to inhabit. Inhabit means stay in. And he was well satisfied with it. Electric bells and speaking tubes afforded communication with the lower stories, while on the mantel stood an electric clock, precisely like that in Mr. Fogg's bedchamber, both beating the same second at the same instant. That's good, that'll do, said Passepartout to himself. He suddenly observed, hung over the clock, a card which, upon inspection, proved to be a programme of the daily routine of the house. It comprised all that was required of the servant, from 8 in the morning, exactly at which hour Phileas Fogg rose, till 7:30, when he left the house for the Reform Club. All the details of service, the tea and toast at 23 minutes past 8, the shaving water at 37 minutes past 9, and the toilet at 20 minutes before 10. So you can see over here, they use time by using, they refer to time by 23 minutes past 8, 37 minutes past 9, 20 minutes before 10. So these are some ways that you can see how they put time into English language so that it sounds formal and not just written in numbers. 23 minutes past 8, 8:23. 37 minutes past 9, 9:37, and 20 minutes before 10 is 9:40. Okay, everything was regulated and foreseen as that was to be done from the 11:30 a.m. till midnight. From 11:30 a.m. to midnight, the hour at which the methodical gentleman retired. Rest. Mr. Fogg's wardrobe was amply supplied and in the best taste. Insufficient. Sorry. Each pair of trousers, coat, and vest bore a number indicating the time of year and season at which they were in turn to be laid out for wearing, and the same system was applied to the master's shoes. In short, the house in Savile Row, which must have been a very temple of disorder and unrest, under the illustrious but dissipated Sheridan, was coziness, comfort, and most idealized. There was no study, nor were there books, which would have been quite useless to Mr. Fogg, for at the Reform two libraries was one great literature and the other of law and politics were at his service. A moderate-sized safe stood in his bedroom, constructed so as to defy fire as well as burglars. Storing his used to store belongings, store valuables in a safe. But Passepartout found neither arms nor hunting weapons anywhere. Everything betrayed the most tranquil and peaceable habits. Having scrutinized the house from top to bottom, he rubbed his hands. A broad smile overspread his features, and he said joyfully, "This is just what I wanted. Ah, we shall get on together, Mr. Fogg and I. What a domestic and regular gentleman. A real machine. Well, I don't mind serving a machine." Chapter 3, in which a conversation takes place which seems likely to cause Phileas Fogg. Dear, Phileas Fogg was having shut the door of his house at 11:30, and having put his right foot before his left 75 times, and his left foot before his right 76 times, reached the Reform Club, an imposing edifice in Pall Mall, which could not have cost less than 3 millions. He repaired at once to the dining room, 9 windows of which opened upon a tasteful garden, where the trees were already gilded with an autumn colouring, and took his place at the habitual table, the cover of which had already been laid for him. His breakfast consisted a side dish, broiled fish with reading sauce, a scarlet slice of roast beef, garnished with mushrooms, a rhubarb and gooseberry tart, a morsel of Cheshire cheese, the whole being washed down with several cups of tea, for which the Reform is famous. He rose at 13 minutes to 1, and directed his steps towards the large hall, a sumptuous apartment adorned with lavishly framed paintings. A flunkey handed him uncut Times, which he proceeded to cut with a skill which betrayed familiarity with this delicate operation. The perusal of this paper absorbed Phileas Fogg until 4:15, whilst the Standard, his next task, occupied him until dinner hour. Dinner passed as breakfast had done, and Mr. Fogg reappeared in the reading room and sat down to the Pall Mall at 20 minutes before 6. Half an hour later, several members of the Reform came in and drew up to the fireplace, where a coal fire was steadily burning. They were Mr. Fogg's unusual partners at whist, Andrew Stuart, an engineer, John Sullivan, and Samuel Fallentin; bankers, Thomas Flanagan, a brewer, and Gauthier Ralph, one of the directors of the Bank of England, all rich and highly respectable personages. Even in a club which comprises the princes of English trade and finance. "Well, Ralph," said Thomas Flanagan, "what about that robbery?" "Oh," replied Stuart, "the bank will lose the money." "On the contrary," broke in Ralph. So, on the contrary can be used in a composition, okay? This means that on the other hand. On the other hand, or however, I hope we may put our hands on the robber. Skillful detectives have been sent to all the principal ports of America and the continent, and he'll be a clever fellow if he slips through their fingers. But have you got the robber's description? Asked Stuart. In the first place, he is no robber at all, returned Ralph positively. What? A fellow who makes off with £55,000? No robber? No. Perhaps he's a manufacturer then. The Daily Telegraph says that he is a gentleman. It was Phileas Fogg, whose head now emerged from behind his papers, who made this remark. He bowed to his friends and entered into the conversation. The affair which formed its subject, and which was town talk, had occurred 3 days before the Bank of England. A package of banknotes, to the value of £55,000, had been taken from the principal cashier's table, that functionary being at the moment engaged registering the receipt of 3 shillings and 6 pence. Of course, he could not have his eyes everywhere. Let it be observed that the Bank of England reposes a touching confidence in the honesty to the public of the public. So what does shillings and sixpence mean? Okay, so shillings and sixpence is actually for this it's a unit of money. It's like dollar how we use to um old is a current indication of currency, something like how you use dollar in Singapore. Dollar, we have dollar, pound, and many more types of currency. Of course, he could not have his eyes everywhere. Let it be observed that the Bank of England reposes a touching confidence in the honesty of the public. There are neither guards nor gratings to protect its treasures. Gold, silver banknotes are freely exposed at the mercy of the first comer. A keen observer of English customs relates that being in one of the rooms of the bank one day, he had the curiosity to examine a gold ingot weighing some 7 or 8 pounds. He took it up, scrutinized it, passed it to his neighbor, he to the next man, and so on until the ingot, going from hand to hand, was transferred to the end of the dark entry. Nor did it return to its place for half an hour. Meanwhile, the cashier had not so much as raised his head. But in the present instance, things had not gone so smoothly. The package of notes not being found when 5 o'clock sounded from the ponderous clock in the drawing office, the amount was passed to the account of profit and loss. As soon as the robbery was discovered, picked detectives hastened off to Liverpool, Glasgow, Havre, Suez, Brindisi, New York, and other ports, inspired by the proffered reward of £2,000 and 5% on the sum that might be recovered. Detectives were also charged with narrowly watching those who arrived at or left London by rail, and a judicial examination was at once entered upon. There were real grounds for supposing, as the Daily Telegraph said, that the thief did not belong to a professional brand. On the day of the robbery, a well-dressed gentleman of polished manners, and with a well-to-do air, had been observed going to and fro in the paying room where the crime was committed. A description of him was easily procured and sent to the detectives, and some hopeful spirits, of whom Ralph was one, did not despair of his apprehension. The papers and clubs were full of the affair, and everywhere the people were discussing the probabilities of a successful pursuit. And the Reform Club was especially agitated, several of its members being bank officials. Ralph would not concede that the work of the detectives was likely to be in vain, for he thought that the prize offered was greatly stimulate their zeal and activity. But Stuart was far from sharing this confidence, and as they placed themselves as at the whist table, they continued to argue the matter. Stuart and Flanagan played together, while Phileas Fogg and had Valentine for his partner. As the game proceeded, the conversation ceased, excepting between the rubbers when it revived again. I maintain, stated Stuart, that the chances are in favor of the thief, who must be a shrewd fellow. Well, but where can he fly to? Asked Ralph. No country is safe for him. Sure. Where could he go then? Oh, I don't know that. The world is big enough. It was once, said Phileas Fogg in a low tone. Cut, sir, he added, handing the cards to Thomas Flanagan. The discussion fell during the rubber, after which Stuart took up its slack. What do you mean by once? Has the world grown smaller? Certainly, returned Ralph. I agree with Mr. Fogg. The world has grown smaller, since a man can now go round it 10 times more quickly than 100 years ago, and that is why the search for this thief would likely be more to succeed. And also why the thief can get away more easily. Be so good as to play, Mr. Stuart, said Phileas Fogg. But the incredulous Stuart was not convinced, and when the hand was finished, said eagerly, You have a strange way, Ralph, of proving that the world has grown smaller. So because you can go round it in 3 months, in 80 days, interrupted Phileas Fogg. That is true, gentlemen, added John Sullivan. Only 80 days. Now that the section between Rothal and Allahabad on the Great Indian Peninsula Railway has been opened, here is the estimate made by the Daily Telegraph. From London to Suez via Mont Cenis and Brindisi by rail and steamboats, 7 days. From Suez to Bombay by steamer, 13 days. Okay, so they use this apostrophe to represent about how it's repeated, and it represents days, just that they are not writing it down. This represents days. Okay, so after adding all together, it would be 80 days. Yes, in 80 days, exclaimed Sword, who in his excitement made a false deal. But that doesn't take into the account bad weather, contrary winds, shipwrecks, railway accidents, and so on. All included, returned Phileas Fogg, continuing to play despite the discussion. But suppose the Hindus or the Indians pull up the rails, replied Stuart. Suppose they stop the trains, pillage the luggage vans, and scalp the passengers. All included, calmly retorted Fogg, adding, as he threw down the cards, two trumps. So this is because they are playing a card game, which is why he said two trumps. Okay? Stuart, whose turn it was to deal, gathered them up and went on. You are right, theoretically, Mr. Fogg, but practically also, Mr. Stuart. I'd like to see you do it in 80 days. It depends on you. Shall we go? Heaven preserve me, but I would wager £4,000 that such a journey made under these conditions is impossible. Quite impossible, on the contrary, returned Mr. Fogg. Well, make it then. The journey round the world in 80 days? I should like nothing better. When? At once. Only I warn you that I shall do it at your expense. It's absurd, cried Stuart, who was beginning to be annoyed at the persistency of his friend. Come, let's go on with the game. Deal over again, then, said Phileas Fogg. There's a false deal. Stuart took up the pack with feverish hand, then suddenly putting them down again. Well, Mr. Fogg, said he, it shall be so. I will wager the $4,000 on it. Calm yourself, my dear Stuart, said Valentine. It's only a joke. When I say I'll wager, returned Stuart, I mean it. All right, said Mr. Fogg, and turning to the others, he continued, I have a deposit of 20,000 at Barings, which I will willingly risk upon it. 20,000 pounds, cried Sullivan. 20,000 pounds, which you would lose by a single accidental delay. The unforeseen does not exist, quietly replied Phileas Fogg. But, Mr. Fogg, 80 days are only the estimate of the least possible time in which the journey can be made. A well-used minimum suffices for everything. But in order not to succeed it, you must jump mathematically from the trains upon the steamers, and from the steamer upon the trains again. I will jump mathematically. You are joking. A true Englishman doesn't joke when he is talking about so serious a thing as a wager, replied Phileas Fogg solemnly. I will bet 20,000 pounds against anyone who wishes that I will make the tour around the world in 80 days or less, in 1920 hours, or 115,000 200 minutes. Do you accept? We accept, replied Messrs. Stuart, Valentine, Sullivan, Flanagan, and Ralph, after consulting each other. Good, said Mr. Fogg. The train leaves for Dover at 9:15. I will take it. This very evening? Asked Stuart. This very evening, returned Phileas Fogg. He took out and consulted a pocket almanac and added, as today is Wednesday, the 2nd of October, I shall be due in London in this very room of the Reform Club on Saturday, the 21st of December, at 9 p.m., or else the 20,000 pounds, now deposited in my name at Barings, will belong to you. In fact and in rights, gentlemen, there is a cheque for the amount. A memorandum of the wager was once drawn up and signed by the 6 parties, during which Phileas Fogg preserved a stoical composure. He certainly did not bet to win, and had only staked the 20,000 pounds, half of his fortune, because he foresaw that he might have to expend the other half to carry out this difficult, not to say unattainable, project. As for his antagonists, they seemed much agitated, not so much by the value of the stake, as because they had some scruples about being under conditions so difficult to their friend. The clock struck 7, and the party offered to suspend the game so that Mr. Fogg might make his preparations for departure. I am quite ready now, was his tranquil response. Diamonds are trumps, so be so good as to play, gentlemen. Having won 20 guineas at whist, and taken leave of his friends, Phileas Fogg at 25 minutes past 7 left the Reform Club. Passepartout, who has conscientiously studied the programme of his duties, was more than surprised to see his master guilty of the inexactness of appearing at this unaccustomed hour, for, according to rule, he was not due in Savile Row until precisely midnight. Mr. Fogg repaired to his bedroom and called out, Passepartout. Passepartout did not reply. It could not be he who was called. It was not the right hour. Passepartout, repeated Mr. Fogg, without raising his voice. Passepartout made his appearance. I've caught you twice, observed his master. But it is not midnight, responded the other, showing his watch. I know it. I don't blame you. We'll start for Dover and Calais in 10 minutes. Okay, so they are about to head out for a journey of 80 days because Mr. Fogg placed a bet with his friends that he could make it back in 80 days. So he will be back in December when at the exact time such that his bet of £20,000 would not be wasted. Okay, moving on. So now his new assistant Passepartout is actually very confused because Mr. Fogg was a very routine man. A puzzled grin overspread Passepartout's round face. Clearly he had not comprehended his master. Monsieur is going to leave home? Yes, returned Phileas Fogg. We are going round the world. Passepartout opened wide his eyes, raised his eyebrows, held up his hands, and seemed about to collapse. So overcome was he with stupefied astonishment. Round the world, he murmured. In 80 days, responded Mr. Fogg. So we haven't a moment to lose. But the trunks, gasped Mr. Passepartout, unconsciously swaying his head from right to left. We'll have no trunks, only a carpet bag with 2 shirts and 3 pairs of stockings for me, and the same for you. We'll buy our own clothes on the way, bring down my mackintosh and travelling cloak, and some stout shoes, though we shall do little walking. Make haste. This means hurry up. Passepartout tried to reply but could not. He went out, mounted to his own room, fell into a chair and muttered, That's good. That is. And I who wanted to remain quiet. He mechanically set about making the preparations for departure. Around the world in 80 days. Was his master a fool? No. Was this a joke then? They were all going to Dover. Good. To Calais. Good again. After all, Passepartout, who had been away from France for 5 years, would not be sorry to set foot in his native soil again. Perhaps they would go once as far as Paris, and it would do his eyes good to see Paris once more. But surely a gentleman so chary of his steps would stop there, no doubt. But then it was none the less true that he was going away. This so domestic person he thought. By 8 o'clock, Passepartout had packed the modest bag containing the wardrobes of his master and himself. Then, still troubled in mind, he carefully shut the door of his room and descended to Mr. Fogg. Mr. Fogg was quite ready. Under his arms might have been observed a red-bound copy of Bradshaw's Continental Railway Steam Transit and General Guide, with its timetables showing the arrival and departure of steamers and railways. He took the carpet bag, opened it, and slipped into a goody roll of Bank of England notes, which would pass whenever he might go. You have forgotten nothing? Asked he. Nothing, monsieur. My mackintosh and cloak. Here they are. Good. Take this carpet bag, handing it to Passepartout. Take good care of it, for there are £20,000 in it. Passepartout nearly dropped the bag, as if the £20,000 were in gold, and weighed him down. Master and the man had then descended. The street door was double locked, and at the end of Savile Row they took a cab and drove rapidly to the Charing Cross. The cab stopped before the railway station at 20 minutes past 8. Passepartout jumped off the box and followed his master, who, after paying the cabman, was about to enter the station, when a poor beggar woman with a child in her arms, her naked feet smeared with mud, her head covered with a wretched bonnet, from which hung a tattered feather, and her shoulders shrouded in rag shawl, approached and mournfully asked for alms. Mr. Fogg took out the 20 guineas he had just won at whist and handed them to the beggar, saying, "Here, my good woman, I'm glad that I met you," and passed on. Passepartout had a moist sensation about the eyes. His master's action touched his susceptible heart. Two first-class tickets for Paris have been speedily purchased. Mr. Fogg was crossing the station to the train when he perceived his five friends of the Reform. "Well, gentlemen," said he, "I'm off, you see, and if you will examine my passport when I get back, you will be able to judge whether I have accomplished the journey agreed upon." "Oh, that would be quite unnecessary," said Mr. Fogg. "Mr. Fogg," said Ralph politely, "we will trust your word, as a gentleman of honour." "You do not forget when you are due in London again?" asked Stuart. "In 80 days, on Saturday, the 21st December, 1872, at a quarter before 9 p.m. Goodbye, gentlemen." Phileas Fogg and his servant seated themselves in a first-class carriage at 20 minutes before 9. 5 minutes later the whistle screamed, and the train slowly glided out of the station. The night was dark, and a fine steady rain was falling. Phileas Fogg, snugly ensconced in his corner, did not open his lips. Passepartout, not yet recovered from his stupefaction, clung mechanically to the carpet bag with its enormous treasure. Just as the train was whirring through Sydenham, Passepartout suddenly uttered a cry of despair. "What's the matter?" asked Mr. Fogg. "Alas, in my hurry, I forgot to turn off the gas in my room." "Very well, young man," returned Mr. Fogg coolly. "It will burn, at your expense." Phileas Fogg rightly suspected that his departure from London would create a lively sensation at the West End. The news of the bet spread through the Reform Club, and afforded an exciting topic of conversation to its members. From the club it soon got into papers throughout England. The boasted tour of the world was talking about, disputed, argued with as much warmth as if the subject were another Alabama claim. Some took sides with the Phileas Fogg, but the majority shook their heads and declared against him. It was absurd, impossible, they declared, that the tour of the world could be made, except theoretically and on paper, in this minimum of time, 80 days, and with the existing means of travelling, the Times, Standard, Morning Post, and Daily News, and 20 other highly respectable newspapers scouted Mr. Fogg's project as madness. The Daily Telegraph alone hesitatingly supported him. People in general thought him a lunatic, blamed his Reform Club friends for having accepted a wager which betrayed the mental aberration of its proposal. Lunatic, crazy. Okay. Articles no less passionate than logical appeared on the question, for geography is one of the pet subjects of the English, and the columns devoted to Phileas Fogg venture were eagerly devoured by all classes of readers. At first some rash individuals, principally of the gentler sex, espoused his cause, which became more popular when the Illustrated London News came out with his portrait, copied from a photograph in the Reform Club. A few readers of the Daily Telegraph even dared to say, "Why not? After all, stranger things have come to pass." At last a long article appeared, on the 7th of October, in the Bulletin of Royal Geographical Society, which treated the question from every point of view. and demonstrated the utter folly of the enterprise. Everything, it said, was against the travelers, every obstacle imposed alike by man and by nature. A miraculous agreement of times of departure and arrival, which was impossible, was absolutely necessary to his success. He might, perhaps, reckon on the arrival of trains at the designated hours. In Europe, where the distances were relatively moderate, but when he calculated upon crossing India in 3 days, and the United States in 7, could he rely beyond misgiving upon accomplishing his task? There were accidents to machinery, the liability of trains to run off the line, collisions, bad weather, the blocking up by snow, were not all these against Phileas Fogg? Would he not find himself, when travelling by steamer in winter, at the mercy of winds and fogs? Is it uncommon for the best ocean steamers to be 2 or 3 days behind time? But a single delay would suffice to fatally break the train of communication. Should Phileas Fogg once miss, even by an hour, a steamer, he would have to wait for the next, and that would irrevocably render his attempt vain. Okay, this means failed attempt. This article made a great deal of noise, and being copied onto all papers, seriously depressed the advocates of the rash tourist. This refers to Mr. Fogg. Everybody knows that England is the world of betting men, who are of a higher class than mere gamblers. To bet is in English temperament. Not only the members of the Reform, but the general public made heavy wagers for or against Phileas Fogg, who was set down in the betting books as he were a racehorse. Bonds were issued and made their appearance on change. Phileas Fogg bonds were offered at par or at a premium, and a great business was done in them. But 5 days after the article in the Bulletin of the Geographical Society appeared, the demand began to subside. Phileas Fogg declined. They were offered by packages, at first of 5, then of 10, until at last nobody would take less than 20, 50, 100. Lord Albemarle, an elderly paralytic gentleman, was now the advocate, the only advocate of Phileas Fogg left. This noble lord, who was fastened to his chair, would have given his fortune to be able to make the tour of the world, if it took 10 years, and he bet £5,000 on Phileas Fogg. When the folly as well as the uselessness of the adventure was pointed out to him, he contented himself with replying, "If the thing is feasible, the first to do it ought to be an Englishman." The Fogg party dwindled more and more. Everybody was going against him, and the bets stood 150 and 200 to 1. And a week after his departure, an incident occurred which deprived him of backers at any price. The Commissioner of Police was sitting in his office at 9 o'clock one evening when the following telegraphic dispatch was put into his hands: Suez to London. Rowan, the Commissioner of Police, Scotland Yard. I found the bank robber Phileas Fogg, sent without delay warrant of arrest to Bombay. Fixed, detective. The effect of this dispatch was instantaneous, immediate. Okay, it was immediate. The polished gentleman disappeared to give place to the bank robber. His photograph, which was hung with those of the rest of the members at the Reform Club, was minutely examined, and it betrayed, feature by feature, the description of the robber which had been provided to the police. The mysterious habits of Phileas Fogg were recalled, his solitary ways, his sudden departure, and it seemed clear that in undertaking a tour around the world on the pretext of a wager, he had no other end in view than to elude the detectives and throw them off his track. Okay, we have now reached chapter 6, in which Fix the detective betrays a very natural impatience. So let's just take a short break over here and you can let me know anything if you want to clarify about the story so far. Okay, moving on. Okay, thank you for all those who are still in the live joining us at Writers at Work to read and learn. We are now reading Around the World in 80 Days, Jules Verne, chapter 6, in which Fix the detective betrays a very natural impatience. Okay, so for this book so far, it seems that Mr. Fogg has placed a bet, okay, that he can travel the whole world in 80 days. So here, the circumstances under which this telegraphic dispatch about Phileas Fogg was sent were as follows. The steamer Mongolia, belonging to the Peninsular and Oriental Company, built of iron, of 2,800 tons burden and 500 horsepower, was due at 7 o'clock a.m. on Wednesday, the 9th of October at Suez. The Mongolia plied regularly between Brindisi and Bombay via the Suez Canal and was one of the fastest steamers belonging to the company, always making more than 10 knots an hour between Brindisi and Suez and 9.5 between Suez and Bombay. Two men were promenading up and down the wharves among the crowds of natives and strangers who were sojourning at this once straggling village. Now, thanks to the enterprise of M. Lesseps, a fast-growing town. One was the British consul at Suez, who, despite the prophecies of the English government and the unfavourable predictions of Stephenson, was in the habit of seeing, from his office window, English ships daily passing to and fro on the Great Canal, by which the old roundabout road from England to India was by the Cape of Good Hope and abridged by at least a half. The other was a small, slight-built personage with a nervous, intelligent face, and bright eyes peering out from under eyebrows which he was incessantly twitching. He was just now manifesting unmistakable signs of impatience, nervously pacing up and down, and unable to stand still for a moment. This was Fix, one of the detectives who had been dispatched from England in search of the bank robber. It was his task to narrowly watch every passenger who arrived at Suez, and to follow up all who seemed to be suspicious characters. All bore a resemblance to description of the criminal. which he had received 2 days before from the police headquarters at London. The detective was from the police headquarters at London. I'm sorry. The detective was evidently inspired by the hope of obtaining the splendid reward, which would be the price of success, and awaited with a feverish impatience easy to understand the arrival of steamer Mongolia. So you say, Consul, asked he for the 20th time, that this steamer is never behind time? No, Mr. Fix, replied the consul. She was bespoken yesterday at Port Said, and the rest of the way is no account to such a craft. I repeat that the Mongolia has been in advance of the time required by company regulations, and gained the prize awarded for excess of speed. Does she come directly from Brindisi? Directly from Brindisi. She takes on the Indian mails there, and she left there Saturday at 5 p.m. Have patience, Mr. Fix. She will not be late. But really, I don't see how from the description you have you will be able to recognize your man, even if he is on board the Mongolia. A man rather feels the presence of these fellows. Counsel then recognizes them. You must have a scent for them, and a sense is like a sixth sense which combines hearing, seeing, and smelling. I've arrested more than one of these gentlemen in my time, and if my thief is on board, I'll answer for it. He'll not slip through my fingers. I hope so, Mr. Fix, for it was a heavy robbery. A magnificent robbery, Consul. £55,000. We don't often have such windfalls. Burglars are getting to be so contemptible nowadays. A fellow gets hung for a handful of shillings. Mr. Fix, said the consul, I like your way of talking and I hope you'll succeed, but I fear you will find it far from easy. Don't you see? The description which you have there has a singular resemblance to an honest man. Consul, remarks the detective dogmatically, great robbers always resemble honest folks. Fellows who have rascally faces have only one course to take, and that is to remain honest. Otherwise, they will be arrested offhand. The artistic thing is to unmask honest countenances. It's no light task, I admit, but a real art. Mr. Fix evidently was not wanting in a tinge of conceit. Little by little, the scene on the quay became more animated. Sailors of various nations, merchants, shipbrokers, porters, fellers, bustled to and fro as if the steamer was immediately expected. The weather was clear and slightly chilly. The minarets of the town loomed above the houses in the pale rays of the sun. A jetty pier, some 2,000 yards long, extended into the roadstead. A number of fishing smacks and coasting boats, some retaining the fantastic fashion of ancient galleries, and discernible on the Red Sea. As he passed along among the busy crowd, Fix, according to habit, scrutinized the passersby with a keen, rapid glance. It was now 10:30. The steamer doesn't come, he exclaimed as the port clock struck. She can't be far off now, returned his companion. How long will she stop at Suez? 4 hours, long enough to get in her coal. It is 1,310 miles from Suez to Aden, at the other end of the Red Sea, and she has to take in a fresh coal supply. And does she go from Suez directly to Bombay? Without putting it in anywhere. Good, said Fix. If the robber is on board, he will not no doubt get off at Suez, so as to reach the Dutch or French colonies in Asia by some other route. He ought to know that he will not be safe an hour in India, which is English soil. Unless, objected the consul, he is exceptionally shrewd. An English criminal, you know. is always better concealed in London than anywhere else. This observation furnished the detective food for thought, and meanwhile the consul went away to his office. Fix, left alone, was more impatient than ever, having a presentiment that the robber was on board the Mongolia. If he had indeed left London intending to reach the New World, he would naturally take the route via India, which was less watched and more difficult to watch than that of the Atlantic. But Fix's reflections were soon interrupted by a succession of sharp whistles, which announced the arrival of Mongolia. The porters and fellows rushed down the quay, and a dozen boats pushed off the shore to go and meet the steamer. Soon her gigantic hull appeared, passing along between the banks, and 11 o'clock struck as she anchored in the road. She brought an unusual number of passengers, some of whom remained on deck and scanned the picturesque panorama of the town, while the greater part disembarked in the boats and landed on the quay. What is the quay area? Quay area is somewhere where boats usually would be parked at. So, for what quay means, is pronounced as key, not koi. Okay, the pronunciation is like key. It sounds like key. So it's actually a place where boats are tied up. Okay, moving on. Fix took up a position and carefully examined each face and figure which made its appearance. Presently, one of the passengers, after vigorously pushing his way through the importunate crowd of porters, came up to him and politely asked if he could point out the English consulate, at the same time showing a passport which he wished to have visa. So visa to apply to go overseas. Fix instinctively took the passport and with a rapid glance at the description of its bearer, an involuntary motion of surprise nearly escaped him, for the description in the passport was identical with that of the bank robber which he had received from Scotland Yard. "Is this your passport?" asked he. "No, it's my master's." "And your master is—" "He stayed on board. But he must go to the council in person, so as to establish his identity." "Oh, is that necessary?" "Quite indispensable." "And where is the consulate?" "There, on the corner of the square," said Fix, pointing to a 200 steps off. "I'll go and fetch my master, who won't be much pleased, however, to be disturbed." The passenger bowed to Fix, and returned to the steamer. Okay, moving on. The detective passed down the quay and rapidly made his way to the consul's office, where he was once admitted to the presence of that official. "Consul," said he without preamble, I have strong reasons for believing that my man is a passenger on the Mongolia. And he narrated that he had just passed concerning the passport. Well, Mr. Fix, replied the consul, I shall not be sorry to see the rascal's face, but perhaps he won't come here, that is, if he is the person you suppose him to be. A robber doesn't quite like to leave traces of his flight behind him. And besides, he is not obliged to have his passport countersigned. If he is as shrewd as I think he is, consul, he would come. To have his passport visaed? Yes, passports are only good for annoying honest folks, and aiding in the flight of rogues. I assure you will be quite the thing for him to do. But I hope you will not visa the passport. Why not? If the passport is genuine, I have no right to refuse. Still, I must keep this man here until I can get a warrant to arrest him from London. Ah, that is your lookout. But I cannot. The consul did not finish his sentence, for as he spoke, a knock was heard at the door, and two strangers entered, one of whom was the servant whom Fix had met on the quay. The other who was his master, held out his passport with the request that the consul would do him the favour to visa it. The consul took the document and carefully read it, whilst Fix observed, or rather devoured, the stranger with his eyes from a corner of the room. You are Mr. Phileas Fogg, said the consul, after reading the passport. Yes, I am. And this man is your servant. He is a Frenchman named Passepartout. You are from London? Yes, and you are going to Bombay. Very good, sir. You know that a visa is useless and that no passport is required? I know it, sir, but I wish to prove, by a visa, that I came by Suez. Very well, sir. The consul proceeded to sign and date the passport, after which he was added his official seal. Mr. Fogg paid the customary fee, coldly bowed and went out, followed by his servant. Well, queried the detective. Well, he looks and acts like a perfectly honest man, replied the consul. Possibly, but that is not the question. Do you think, consul, that this phlegmatic gentleman resembles, feature by feature, the robber whose description I have received? I concede that, but then, you know all the descriptions. I'll make certain of it, interrupted Fix. The servant seems to me less mysterious than the master. Besides, he is a Frenchman, and can't help talking. Excuse me for a little while, consul. Fix started off in search of Passepartout. Meanwhile, Mr. Fogg, after leaving the consulate, repaired to the quay, gave some orders to Passepartout, went off the Mongolia in a boat, and descended to his cabin. He took up his notebook, which contained the following memoranda. Left London Wednesday, October 2nd, at 8:45 p.m. Reached Paris Thursday, October 3rd, at 7:20 p.m. Left Paris Thursday, 8:40 a.m. Reached Turin by Mont Cenis Friday, October 4th, at 6:35 a.m. Left Turin Friday at 7:20 a.m. Arrived at Brindisi Saturday. Sailed on the Mongolia Saturday at 5 p.m. Reached Suez Wednesday, October 9th at 11 a.m. Total of hours spent 158 plus, or in days 6 days and a half. These dates were inscribed in an itinerary divided into columns, indicating the month, the day of the month, and the day for the stipulated and actual arrivals at each principal point for Paris, Brindisi, Suez, Bombay, Calcutta, Singapore, Hong Kong, Yokohama, San Francisco, New York, and London from the 2nd of October to the 21st of December, and giving a space for settling down again made all the loss suffered on arrival at each locality. This methodical record thus contains an account of everything needed, and Mr. Fogg always knew whether he was behindhand or in advance of his time. On this Friday, October 9th, he noted his arrival at Suez and observed that he had as yet neither gained nor lost. He sat down quietly to breakfast in his cabin, never once thinking of inspecting the town, being one of those Englishmen who are wont to see foreign countries through the eyes of their domestics. Okay, so for today we'll just stop at chapter 7. So thank you all for tuning in to our live today, and do remember to follow us so that you can join our live later in the afternoon, and as well as our daily life lessons where we go through test papers, read passages, or teach vocabulary, grammar, and many more. So thank you for learning with us, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.